I'm going to present to you, like Oskar said, an extract and modification of my master thesis. So I've chosen to call this the Art of Jugendstil Composition. And this is the contents. First an introduction, then the registrations and some testing, and then lastly an infill project. So I'm just going to start with a quote by Eirik Lien. The appearance, the building style itself, has an aesthetic and psychological value in addition to its function as a residence and shelter. A building shapes the lives and living standards of those who live in it. A building style helps to shape and give character to those in the neighborhood locally, as well as the urban environment in a wider context. So, an introduction and my fascination for Jugendstil. And this is me, 5 years old. And this is me, 25 years old, and now I'm 27, so not much has changed, apparently. Not even the golden shoes with the bow. But jokes aside, I've always been interested in aesthetics and composition, and this is about composing an outfit with all its elements and colors and materials and fabrics. And this is very transferable to my interest in architecture. So it felt very natural for me to work with the same themes on my master thesis. So just a quick historical overview. In Trondheim, the Jugendstil emerged between 1900 and 1915 with over 400 buildings in the style still existing today. And at this time, there was a stock market crash in Oslo, the capital. So many skilled Norwegian architects gathered in Trondheim, as well as in Ålesund, the Jugend city, where I also went on a study trip for my thesis. And many of the architects had a combination of architecture education from Trondheim and, for example, Germany, hence the term Jugendstil, and in favor of Art Nouveau, which influenced the style expression. So this is a map of the registered Jugendstil buildings in Trondheim, with its architects. So, quickly after I moved to Trondheim to study architecture, I'm from the Oslo area, my fascination for Jugendstil started. And naturally, buildings like these will catch the eye of most people. But the style comes in many shapes and forms. Often with depth and dynamics in the streetscape. And even the more simple and sober facades have an obvious beauty to them. And this was my balcony when I lived in Trondheim. And these beautiful large windows with the grid in the upper part create a stunning atmosphere inside when the sunlight shines through in the afternoon. So, why am I dragged towards this style so strongly? What makes this style so suitable in a city context such as Trondheim? Which characteristics and principles can we extract from it? And then how is this applicable when designing today? After doing research in Trondheim as well as Ålesund, I summarized and extracted my findings into these 4 principles I chose to call the Jugendstil formula. So we have the rhythms in favor of a strict grid. So the placement of openings are an important aesthetic element itself. Then you have a balance between horizontality and verticality. And then window types, you have varied but balanced formats with well-proven and reliable proportions and dimensions, smaller subdivisions as opposed to larger surfaces of glass. And then groupings, for example, recessed or protruding sections, lines, different materials or colors. And then differing elements can be marked by dedicated sections, and larger spaces are reduced visually. And then finally, depth. So profiles or cornices that mark transitions, bay windows, resides, recessed windows and detailing, or a protruding foundation or base which gives the building a heaviness. And this might seem fairly abstract for now, but it will hopefully become more obvious and visual throughout the presentation. So this is an extract of some of the registrations I did. I did also color registrations, but I will omit them in this presentation. So you have wall openings, so windows and doors. And here are 3 examples of typical Jugendstil buildings in Trondheim. And when you schematize the window and door openings in these facades, you quickly see that there are certain patterns and rhythms. There is a rhythm in the different formats and placement of windows on the facade. And to show the distinctiveness of the style, here is a comparison between Prinsens gate 10A in Jugendstil and its more neoclassical neighbor to the left, which is more strict, at least that's how I perceive it. And this is a street where I did my infill project. Then you have first floors. And these are examples of buildings with commercial functions on the first floor. So the design largely reflects the overall function, which is connecting with passerbys on the street and exposing what's going on the inside. And the window and door shapes and designs are appealing and varied compared to large and often bland glass surfaces. Then you have the carnap, or the bay window, which I really love. So the bay window is a common element in Jugendstil, especially in Trondheim. They come in many different shapes and dimensions and create a more dynamic street facade and interesting rooms inside. And then corners. So in Ålesund, there are many examples of corner buildings in Jugendstil, which also have commercial functions on the first floor. And the rounded or cut-off entrance is perceived as inviting and helps to create a friendlier street space. And they tend to have overhangs and sometimes towers that provide kind of a majestic finish to the end of a building row. Then the windows themselves, and perhaps the strongest characteristic of Jugendstil, in my opinion, is its rhythmic composition of windows in different sizes, formats, subdivisions, and groupings. Most typical are the 2 and 3 unit windows with T-posts and smaller grids in the upper part. But there are many other variations, as you can see. And then groupings. So due to the different formats and spacing of windows, they are often given a more coherent expression by connecting them with horizontal or vertical articulation. And this can be in the shape of simple lines, arches, or more decorative or ornamental variants, as grooves or protruding elements with different depth. On the right, you have vertical grouping to create a vertical expression or counteract an otherwise horizontal facade. Other times, it helps to further enhance windows that stand out from the others in terms of format and design, so that they get their own emphasis instead of creating an imbalance in the facade rhythm. Or this type of framing can be a solution for filling a larger gap visually. So this is just a gallery of some of the expressions, like the carnap in many different shapes, and some detailing, both from Trondheim, and then some windows, the different window types and how they can be grouped together, and then variants of corners, and also gables, which is common in Jugendstil, and how just some small details and emphasis can make a huge difference in the overall composition. So another quote by Stefan Tschudi Madsen, architecture and art historian. Its main feature is an unusual emphasis upon the ornamental value of the line, a line of undulating movement and rhythmic force, often enhanced by a counter movement filled with tension. So then I did a lot of testing with the Jugendstil glasses on. So I just sketched a lot, also in the context of the Infill building, with inspiration from both Jugendstil buildings and more contemporary variants. And then I did sort of a metamorphosis from very traditionally inspired Jugendstil buildings to more, I guess, simplified or what some would call more contemporary variants. And what changes are critical and really weakens the overall design and balance, and what is sufficient or can even strengthen the composition, etc. And then, I guess like the sketching is really weak in this picture, but then I analyzed the sketches. So first, the main shape. So analyze with focus on the different aspects. Yeah, you can barely see the sketching, but okay. First, the windows on the first floor, from decorative windows with smaller subdivisions to simplified larger glass surfaces, and then windows on the other floors. And here I've highlighted not only the windows, but also the sections that connect them. They can, for example, express a strong horizontality or verticality. Then bay windows and rhizolites, and what happens when you change the geometry or the depth effect, and how little is just enough. And then corner, how inviting is the shape? Does it mark the entrance? What effect has the overhang or tower? And in the case of roofs, I've come to the conclusion that the shape obviously has a huge effect on the overall expression. And finally, we have dormers and roof windows, and here the degree of recession and withdrawal has a lot to say for whether the dormers are perceived as a part of the roof or the facade itself. So just an extract from my Infill project. This is the situation in Trondheim, and the red buildings are Jugendstil buildings, and the circle marks the plot. So the plot has a variation of different styles and sizes and colors, so it was very interesting to work with. I'm not going to say a lot about it, just show the drawings and model photos. So it's a public function on the first floor and apartments in the upper floors in this corner typology. So 3 types. A more traditionally inspired type with sort of a cut-off corner without overhang. And then another variant with a bit more, leaning a bit more toward a contemporary design, but still very Jugendstil in its language, with an overhang on the corner and mansard roof. And then the final variant with a flat roof, which did a lot for the overall expression, with more round shapes. And then I summarized everything to see if I followed the Jugendstil formula with all its elements. So just some photos. So these are laser cut models. I'm going to end this with a quote by Dag Myklebust, who worked at Riksantikvaren and wrote a book about Ålesund, the Jugendtown. The Jugendstil architects often had a strong social awareness, and they were driven by the belief that artistic values help to increase people's quality of life. Beauty in our public surroundings is a democratically accessible value. Thank you so much.